welcome back to another episode of Navigating Wellness. Now friends, do you ever get that feeling that we are living in an inverted reality? I mean, think about it. Everything that harms us, that is detrimental to our health, is readily available, it's convenient, it's cheap, it's advertised on almost every corner, and everything that is healthy and good for our overall well-being is strange, is labeled as alternative, or it's just ridiculously overpriced. Let's take drinking, for example. People call it social drinking. I call it social sinking. Why? Because mentally, physically, and spiritually, it's dragging us down. There's a reason why they call it spirits. Because when you drink enough of these spirits, your spirit ends up taking a back seat, and you become a viable host for other spirits to enter into your body. And the next morning, you wake up so hammered and with a hangover, and you don't know where the hell these spirits have driven your body. Now, whenever we meet up with friends, what's the common phrase? Hey, let's go for a drink. That's what's considered normal in society. Unfortunately, when friends meet up with me and I tell them, hey, let's go for a drink, you know where I'll be taking them? I'll be taking them to one of those organic, cold-pressed green juice bars that are packed and loaded with multivitamins. And then, you know what happens? They look at me like as if I'm the drunk one. That's why I said we're living in an inverted reality. Well, there's another drink that is maybe not as harmful as alcohol, but not that much different. And that was meant to be used on occasions as a medicine, but is instead being used regularly. Now, some of you may have guessed I'm talking about coffee. It's one of those stimulants that people are addicted to and they can't get by without having a couple of cups of coffee a day. I call coffee liquid anxiety. Now, the problem with coffee is that it's acidic. And add that on top of an already acidic diet, and you have a double dose of acidity. And this ends up disrupting the human pH balance. And when we end up having an acidic environment, we tend to become more vulnerable to viruses that thrive in an acidic environment. We've disrupted the human pH and we make ourselves vulnerable to all sorts of chronic conditions. And you have to ask, is this all a convenient mishap in society? Because, like I said, we live in an inverted reality. Let's take food, for example. Processed foods. Foods that are ultra-processed, laden with chemicals, sprayed with pesticides. Most of these are just considered food today. These are the baseline foods of most people's diet. On the other hand, you have healthy foods that are organic, that are free of chemicals and pesticides. However, these require a special label that indicates that they are organic. They're not as readily available and they're overpriced. Now you have to ask, is this not an inverted reality? That foods that are meant to be closer to nature, closer to their natural form, are less readily available, are overpriced, and are considered weird. I don't blame anyone. The system makes all this look normal. And if anyone questions or follows a different path, you're considered an outlier and you'll generally be labeled as crazy or the weird one. However, in a world where normal means you have chronic illness, you're suffering from poor mental health, and you're just all around living a miserable life, I think being the outlier and being called the crazy one is probably the better alternative. Now get this, I'm not here sitting on some high horse trying to preach at you. I've been there. I've consumed all the processed junk foods. I've ended up with a chronic health condition, and I was given medication or drugs that masked the symptoms and done absolutely nothing to address the underlying root cause of the problem. And this all led me down the path to trying to find a solution that actually addresses the underlying problem. And this led me to this discovery that we are actually living in an inverted reality. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. It has such a profound effect on your perception of reality that you start to recognize that many people who are still continuing on this path are actually going down this path of taking micro doses of toxicity, and eventually when they reach the tipping point, it culminates into a chronic condition. And that is why you're finding chronic conditions are becoming more and more prevalent today than they were ever before in the past. But like I said, I'm not here to preach perfection. This is about recognizing how our reality has been inverted and to start to make changes. Now, my goal is that we start to make these slow changes. Slow because I don't think any of this is going to be achievable overnight, especially if it requires a vast majority of us that are following this conventional path to start changing our behaviors. However, if we all start to make these small incremental choices, one meal at a time, one moment of conscious awareness, and sharing this sort of message with people that you know, that all can add up cumulatively to help us make the shift. A shift into a reality where our health comes first, is prioritized, and we start to invert the inversion. Imagine flipping the script. Imagine if all these coffee shops and bars around every corner were to be replaced with organic cold press juice bars, whole food cafes, and if all these grocery stores that are just lined with shelves of processed, chemical-laden foods were to be replaced with community gardens where food is organically grown, free of pesticides, free of these chemical additives and processing, where people can go and volunteer their time and grow their own food and feel much more connected to the very foods that we consume, where this food is freely available to everyone, where there is no profit motives attached to the sale of foods, then this would be the ideal reality. This is what sanity should look like. This is what normal should look like, where we are much more connected to nature. Because this inverted reality that we are living is inverted by design. And unfortunately, it doesn't have us humans in mind. In fact, it is a system that cannibalizes the very people that are participating in this economy. That is why I so much believe that this vision that I have is not a utopia. It's a version of what sanity should look like. Now, I think if enough of us start to make these small choices, to start to make a difference each meal we have, each conscious moment of awareness that we have, to start to make these small incremental changes, cumulatively, all this will start to add up. And by the time of future generations, there'll be enough of us crazy people to flip this entire script and have that become the new normal. And I do believe that if we collectively can start to make these conscious choices, it will be a much better world for us in the future, as well as for future generations. So with that, people, I'll see you in the future. Cultivating your own food and freeing us from this inverted reality. With that, see you in our next epic video.